All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for being with us today. And welcome to the inaugural or first Inherent Risk podcast, Can Talk, where we're going to be talking about concussions in hockey. I have six wonderful speakers with us today, all who I've either had on the podcast or been on the side of my production team that I've been speaking with. So I'm really excited to have the discussion here. And we'll start with just individually introducing the group and kind of explaining a little about who you are and your experiences with concussions. So on my grid here, I'll pass it first to Ryan.
Yeah, so my name's Ryan Sutton. I'm the executive director of Heads Up Can, and I've been working with Joel for a while now, trying to build out the Inherent Risk podcast. Me personally, I've had seven concussions now, four of them in hockey. And I did, when I was 18, had to stop playing, I guess, contact hockey, and now transitioned over to intramurals, which I don't play anymore, and whatever hockey I can really find. But to be honest, I haven't played hockey in probably a year. I played pond hockey once or twice this winter, and yeah, I still love the game, but it's definitely changed a lot since I was younger. That's for sure.
Sure, thank you so much for sharing, and we'll pass it next to Molly.
Yeah, I'm a former college goalie. I played 4 years of hockey at Harvard and 1 year of softball, and I had two concussions from hockey. My last one was actually a car accident when I was supposed to be a sophomore in college, and my relationship with hockey has changed a lot since I graduated. I retired right after my senior year was over and needed to step away from the game, and then ended up playing 1 year of rec league with a bunch of guys who I met in Boston, which is where I was living. Had a ton of fun, and then had a close call where I thought I had a concussion. Turns out I was just being hypersensitive to it and decided it wasn't really worth it to continue. So I actually haven't been on the ice in it's almost 2 years now. So it's been nice to just be a fan and to watch and to be able to cheer without the training aspect of it.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's a little different, but definitely it's nice. And we'll go to Tyler next.
Nice to meet you all, Tyler Brower. I think my background with hockey is interesting. I think I'm the first kid to grow up in Hawaii to play junior collegiate and pro hockey, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I moved to Minnesota for high school, played at Edina High School, which is a powerhouse name. A lot of people went to Harvard. Shout out to Harvard there, Molly.
I was just gonna say we probably have a lot of overlapping hockey players then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for me, bunch of concussions. It started my first year on skates in sixth grade in 2006. Continuously to have them since up to about 2014, I think was the last one that was diagnosed, or 2013. Full count number, I don't really know. It's hard with playing with those symptoms and you get hit in the head. It's hard to really tell. So, but thankfully, I haven't had too much lingering issues. Got some help for the last couple of years. Had to take a few years in between. I left college early, took a few years off of hockey to get healthy, with the hopes and prayer that I could return to at least have like one pro season. And my neurologist was really helping me with those issues over the couple of years, and then she gave me the green light, and I got to go play a couple years in Germany, and then the tail end of the season last year, right before COVID, here in the US, which was amazing. Just retired this fall after getting married. I'd have to go move away from my new bride, and I was just like, you know what, I don't want to do it, and it's a tough year for hockey anyway. So got to live out a short dream, and pretty much symptom free, more or less.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, that's why we wanted to have you here. You're such a unique story. And I'll pass that down to producer Jake next.
Hey guys, I'm Jake Birman. I help produce the Inherent Risk podcast along with my friend Joel, who you all know is the host. Hopefully going to take on a little bit more responsibility in the short term, maybe doing some recap kind of episode things, but we'll see where that goes. But for myself and my concussion past, had about 6 or 7 concussions. It's kind of hard to count all of them individually because they started back when I was like about 13, I think, or maybe even 12. And then I had my last one in my own house in a freak accident about a year and a half ago. And yeah, so since then, just been going through lots of different therapies. Had a little bit of a rough patch with, trying to get fully 100% recovered. But I've been going through craniosacral therapy recently and more or less symptom free. So I had some bad stretches in the last couple of weeks with headaches. I think I bumped my head at like a cottage I was at recently, and that kind of, maybe spurred some lingering effects. But aside from that, I've been pretty good. And I played all kinds of different sports growing up. I never was kind of a one sport person. I played basketball, I played hockey, I played football, baseball for a little while, played rugby on my school team and volleyball. So kind of never chose one path to go down, but I, consider myself an all around athlete and got concussions in all the different sports I played. So I can definitely relate to all of you guys in some way with that.
Yeah, that's actually how I met you. You joined the men's league team I was playing on, in which I actually was concussed and not playing at the time that you joined, and then got another concussion, and we both stopped playing. Next, we'll go to Alley.
My name is Alley Goodreau. I am a former St. FX hockey player. I played there for 4 years. Unfortunately, in my last year, I sustained 2 concussions in about a month. So I was pretty out of commission for a while. Went home for a month with the hopes of returning, but never fully recovered after that. So we just decided collectively with my coaches, my trainer, that it was probably best for me not to continue. Just the risk outweighed everything else, unfortunately. I have a pretty unique perspective because I did my honors thesis in psychology, and a lot of my thesis was focused on concussion history of the athletes at St. FX. So I got to see the raw data, the numbers, very alarming statistics, linking that to mental health symptoms as well. And then in the future, I'm hoping to pursue clinical psychology, where I would really love to, do more research on concussions and traumatic brain injuries and really help progress that field because it is very needed. I would say I probably have diagnosed concussions, probably 4 or 5, undiagnosed, a lot more. I couldn't even count how many I've had. I'm sure that's the same for everyone as well. But yeah, I haven't been on the ice for quite a while, but before COVID happened, I was playing ball hockey and really found my niche with that and really started to enjoy that. So looking forward to getting back to that.
That's great, and I think it's so amazing the research that you're doing, and hopefully some great research in the future as well. Last, we'll go up to Seth up top.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. So I'm Seth Mendelsohn. I'm the creative director of Heads Up Can. And we've been working with Joel on this podcast. And it's something that's near and dear to my heart because I think we all have learned the hard way of the inherent risk that comes with sport. For me personally, I suffered my one and only diagnosed concussion playing football. Like Ali just mentioned, there's been a lot of moments that I've reflected on, whether it was as a goalie in hockey or playing football, where I just didn't really know entirely where I was and was catching my breath and trying to really focus on the game. And, now looking back at it with all the information I've been able to gain through our journey with Heads Up Can, I've definitely had a few more brain injuries than was diagnosed. But yeah, this topic is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm really excited to, talk more in an effort to challenge the stigma.
That's great. And, it's been so fulfilling for myself to have connected with Ryan and you and worked on this project, and, get to speak with individuals like everyone here and talk about a topic exactly like you said that, is important, but also very something that's touched all of our lives in an unfortunate way. So yeah, well, I guess I'll explain a little bit how this is going to work. I have 8 topics for us to talk about. I feel like I'm just going to pose the topic at the beginning. I'll give everyone a chance to kind of individually answer it, and then we'll discuss as the group and move on to the next one. All right, so our
Awesome.
first topic, and it's one that we've kind of discussed with almost every guest on the podcast, is the correlation between concussions and mental health. And then I'll pass it off and do the same order for this one. So Ryan up first.
Yeah, so first of all, I didn't address it in my intro, but I did actually sustain a concussion 12 days ago. So don't mind me if I'm a little out of it. Just brief story on that. I was playing just indoor soccer with Seth and another buddy, and basically went to kick a ball that was around shoulder height. My other foot came out from under me, and I just landed on my back and smoked my head. So yeah, I've been going through recovery, feeling good for the majority of it. Definitely the start was tough, but battling through now. And yeah, so I do have a headache a little bit, so I'll be kind of on and off of here. But yeah, just wanted to share that before I kind of get into it.
I
I
appreciate
know I
that.
forgot about that. But yeah, in terms of mental health, I think the thing that I'm most interested in within that is the linkages between having previous anxiety or before you actually have a concussion, and the linkages to that and prolonged symptoms. So through the research right now, I am also in my master's at Brock University studying concussion, stigma, and sport. I've looked at how anxiety is a significant predictor to prolonged symptoms. So just addressing that right off the bat, I think is something that can really help people understand just the holistic side of it, and how living like through meditation and trying to do as much as you can to live a healthy life and to eliminate anxiety just in general can really help with the concussion recovery process.
Absolutely. And I'll pass it off to Molly next.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting note about anxiety and mental health with concussions. But one of the things that that I think about is that idea of losing a piece of who you were when you're not able to play, even before you retire, right? When you're concussed and you go from being and feeling a certain way to not being able to play or practice or feel like yourself. That creates what I've always called the vortex that's really hard to sort of escape, where you start spiraling and thinking nothing's ever going to get better and I can't get away from it. But there's this stigma around articulating that to your teammates and your friends, because everybody wants to seem tough. But the mental health thing is, without dealing with that and healing that part, whether you feel 100% or not, to me it's impossible to have one without the other.
Absolutely, it is. And I'll pass it off to Tyler there next.
I mean, yeah, you guys are all going to have amazing things to say. And so far, two of you said a lot that I'd like to touch on. More or less, to keep it really short and simple for me, is our brain is everything for us, right? Like, we look at life, majority of things you do, it's all brain related. Even just mindset, right? As an athlete, you go through mindset training and mental coaching, and I can do this. I can get better. Like, I was at the point where mentally I would stare at YouTube videos of the healing process of your body to try to trick my brain into healing my body quicker after surgeries or during concussions. So mental health is a huge part of that, and you can lose your mental health in the progress or situation of having a concussion, right? Like, obviously you're down because your brain is injured, and that is what's probably motoring everything. And then, it's just foggy and all these other issues are going on. So negative self-talk will come in, all these other issues will come in. I mean, the correlation, it's the biggest thing. And I'm really glad it's the first topic we talk about, because we got to get it over with right away, because we could sit here and talk about it for the rest of the day about how it's really hurt everyone. But yeah, long story short, mental health is something that is super important, and especially now more than ever during COVID and during all this, being alone and social distancing and physical distancing. I mean, we're going to see a lot of things change over the next few years. A lot of studies, maybe from Alley, where she's going to come out with some hard data and scientific facts for everyone to see and be like, wow, this is serious.
Yeah, and it's something we'd like to see more with strictly within hockey. So hopefully that'll happen as well. Jake, pass to you.
Yeah, I love everything you guys have said so far, and I mean, I have some very interesting kind of, I guess, perspectives on this kind of stuff. Mostly, I think because of my own family history with mental health. My brother has bipolar, was diagnosed with depression at a very young age. My sister is like one of the most severely mentally ill people. My twin sister, I should say, is one of the most severely mentally ill people I've ever been around, for sure. And I always think about the idea, like, mental health, like the symptoms of it, like anxiety, depression, all these things that we talk about as symptoms, but like mental health is obviously affected by concussions, like the health of your brain, the actual health of it, like whether you have like internal bleeding or some neurological damage, like it's linked like to the word itself is the symptoms, and the symptoms are the word, it's like the same exact thing. And I know for myself, it's hard to kind of disconnect like your body from your brain. And I think it's interesting that we hit our heads as, in various ways as athletes or as people in our lives. And no one in the world, or very few people we knew in life, kind of like were connecting how our mental health was connected to the health of our brains, and like it makes no sense kind of thinking back on that in my life as to like, a lot of the experiences I have with my family and my friends and in school, because it seems like such an obvious correlation, and yet it's not really so directly linked. And like I said, with my own family history with all these different mental health issues, I didn't even see the signs. Like I had no real idea of how my head injuries were affecting my mental health and my motivation, my depression, my anxiety, all these things while I was going through school and throughout my life, because I just kind of didn't know that it was a thing and didn't really pass over my mind. And it seems like I said, such an obvious thing to connect two dots together, but it's very interesting that we all kind of like throughout our lives have failed to kind of come to these conclusions until we're older and kind of have to go through more research or have more experience to actually understand them. But for myself, I went through so many years of various depression and anxiety and problems in school with focusing and motivation, and never once was like, oh, it's because of my concussions. Not a single time until I got older. I don't think my parents did either. My mom is a nurse. She's a nurse professor. So that kind of just gives you a little bit of insight into how kind of disconnected the medical world is from like what common knowledge and logic like seems to be.
Thank you for sharing that honestly, and it's why we want to have these questions, these conversations to bring that awareness up. Pass it off to Alley.
Yeah, what everyone's saying is hitting the nail right on the head. Since the brain plays such a critical role in controlling your behavior and emotions, it's really no surprise that an injury to the brain does worsen either existing mental health symptoms or brings about new issues. If you have pre-existing mental health symptoms, or if you start to develop mental health symptoms from concussions, it does actually prolong your concussion recovery and worsens a lot of concussion symptoms as well. And I think that lots of people don't recognize that. I know for me, just a little bit of personal story. In my last concussion I got, I was just having a conversation with my thesis supervisor, and she just blatantly asked me, "Are you depressed?" And I had never really thought about that before, but that just really like hit home for me. And I was like, you know what? Like, I 100% am depressed. And she said to me, she was like, "I would be surprised if you weren't," because that's just such a common thing that happens. Mental health and brain injuries are hand in hand. Another thing as well is just the lack of social activity that people have following a concussion. There's a common misconception that you're supposed to sit in a dark room and just do absolutely nothing, when that can even worsen your concussion symptoms and your mental health symptoms. You need that peer support around you. And I know for me, I isolated myself a ton through my recovery. And looking back on that, that was definitely one of the things that prolonged it. So yeah, definitely mental health is huge with concussions, and you need to take care of your mental health to recover from the brain injury for sure.
That's a great point. And on the point of the social aspect, like it's tough to connect with anyone that hasn't been through it. So, it's why I keep saying it, but I want to have these conversations. So maybe someone that's listening that doesn't understand can really understand. I'll pass it up to Seth there.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. I really appreciate this topic because it's something that I'm really passionate about. When I received my concussion in my senior year, it's not like I had a broken arm and a cast where people want to come sign it, right? When we get these brain injuries, it's invisible to everyone around us, and you start getting, these looks. It's not really looks of sympathy or empathy. It's looks of question and curiosity as to why you're acting different. And when you're going through it, as many people here have already attested to, it's tough to explain, the symptoms. It's tough to, tell people, that you feel like you can't be yourself. And it's that starts spiraling. And for me, that alienation was really hard. And most of my symptoms from my concussion came or were in the form of mental health. I never had anxiety or depression before that. And much like Jake, alluded to, is like, I didn't think of it as it related to my injury. I just was like going through the motions. And, it hasn't been since I've started this journey with Ryan where I've been able to reflect and realize how much damage that experience did to me and to my psyche. And as Ali mentioned, like, what we were told then during our recovery only made it worse. And we've learned a lot within this time span that, you can't be locked in a dark room. You actually can, be on your phone for a little bit amount of times, and you can connect with people, and that will actually help you in the long term. And those were things that were never expressed to us when we were all going through the recovery. And, in this topic specifically, I feel like it's so important to address because I keep thinking back to literally the first day Ryan and I started Heads Up, where we put a table at Brock University to just share our experiences. And we had hundreds of students, walking by, and we started talking about concussions and mental health. And honestly, I'd say like 9 out of 10 students were like, oh, they're connected. And there's this, when we hear concussions, we're very like, oh, headaches, migraines, CTE. But there's so much more to the symptomology that, we've all experienced in some form or the other. And it's just such a important thing to address and raise awareness to, because Canada right now is already going through a mental health crisis. And, the amount of people that hit their head and don't even realize that they've suffered a concussion, and then it leads to these prolonged symptoms. It's honestly, it's unquantifiable at this point. So the more we can address it and the more we can talk about our own experiences like this, I think it really brings it to the surface and allows people to be a bit more vulnerable and hopefully ask for help.
Thank you for sharing, Seth, and everyone. Honestly, everyone had a really good answer. What this topic really means to me, I look at it as a sense of belonging, and whether that's the sport that I played, hockey, or whether that's just my day-to-day life. I felt that, when I was going through my concussions, specifically my third one, which is the one that kind of like turned my life upside down, was that everyone was just looking at me like I was a completely different person. I had a professor that, the guy who was in charge of my program at George Brown basically accused me of faking my injury and having me to write my exam because he didn't think I was hurt. And that kind of started the whole, me second guessing myself and really thinking that actually there was some mental health issues, and that led to a lot more depression and loss of identity. And it wasn't until I got my fourth concussion in 2018 when I kind of realized that was the breaking point. And that's when I started realizing that I need to start talking about it. I need to tell people that don't even realize that I'm going through this stuff. Some of my best friends that I've known my whole life that had no idea. And truthfully, when I was able to connect with Ryan and Seth and just get this project started, it's been so fulfilling to kind of have these conversations that I always thought I was too vulnerable to have. And so that's what it really means to me. So now I'll turn it to the whole group if anyone has any comments or questions about what anyone else said.
Yeah, Joel, first of all, that was awesome. Yeah, I think vulnerability is such a big part in all of this, right? And being more vulnerable, being more empathetic, and actually trying to advocate for what you're going through, especially within a hockey dressing room. Oh my God, is it ever tough to navigate through that as well? The hypermasculine culture, everybody trying to be strong and mentally tough. So yeah, that's why these conversations are great. And that's why continuing to talk about this topic and the stigma surrounding the injury and even mental health as well are so important to move forward. And that's why stories like yours are so great. And everybody else's here, of course.
I want to second that. This is such a topic that's so near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure as all of you can feel the same in that regard. It seems so interesting to me how, like you said, Ryan, there's such like a stigma or such a culture surrounding like being a tough man or woman in this case, and trying to navigate through a really kind of closed off type of dressing room or environment that you find yourself in when you're competing in sports a lot of the time. People are just not really necessarily interested in being vulnerable or actually talking about their emotions or their day-to-day states or relying on people in those ways and trying to suck up a lot of problems that they might have, or injuries or mask injuries. And as we've seen in the case with Steve Montador, most recently Vincent Jackson, who was just found dead in his hotel room at 38 years old, who played football his entire life. And the list goes on, Chris Benoit, like you can look at all these different people from different sports who are now dead, who either, killed themselves or, had a really terrible experience, through their mental health recovery, and then, eventually perished or whatever. And, the fact that that happens and it's not like talked about as to how that kind of came to be, or how those people even got to the point where their brains were suffering so dramatically from a mental health perspective, but also from a brain health perspective, as Seth alluded to. There's like the headaches and the nausea and all those kind of things, but then there's also the anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts. These kind of things are separate but the same at the same time, right? And how that actually develops to become that is it's flabbergasting to me that there isn't support networks for these people, that it actually becomes that, when it could just probably be resolved much before this, if people actually were listening and really had these people's best interests at heart.
I was actually gonna make a similar point, and what Alley was saying earlier about your thesis advisor saying to you, "Are you depressed?" I think that point blank, like brutally honest interaction is something that we don't get enough, because I think if somebody had asked me that with any of my concussions, my answer probably would have been yes, but nobody asked that, because nobody wants to assume, oh, you seem depressed, because they think that that's going to be, that they're bringing something that you don't know you're suffering through to light. And I think if we were all a little bit more aware of asking your teammate if they're depressed, or asking your friend if they're depressed, isn't an attack or an affront, or that you think that there's something wrong with them. It's, let me help you. I think that interaction could save and help a lot of people as they're going through it, as opposed to, once you realize that you're concussed and depressed, and then trying to solve for it at that point. I just thought it was really interesting and sort of striking that, like, are you depressed? Like, no one's ever asked me that.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-opening. It took me completely off guard, but like you said, that's such a fair question to ask, and it does not get asked enough. Like, I feel like in the day and age we live in, we're all very like scared of, we're tiptoeing around and don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but just the mental health side of concussions, like it's almost inevitable for it to happen. So it definitely needs to be a more open conversation.
And I'll add, it adds, it segues to our next conversation, but it adds a whole layer of stigma that you're already dealing with concussions, that, you have to mitigate through that. So I guess, we'll go straight on to the second question, which we kind of talked about in this recap here. And the topic is hockey culture and glorifying injuries and the stigma that it creates around concussion. So we'll go reverse order this time. I'll pass to Seth first.
Yeah. I think just in sport, the way that we look at any form of physical contact and glorify it it's tough, because, I remember hockey's changed a lot, but even to this day, like there's still like, we still want, like fans want those fights. Like players have to have those fights to generate momentum when they're really like they're doing it for their team and they're sacrificing themselves, and they get glorified for their 2 minutes, and then what about all the things that happen in their lives after? And as Jake alluded to, like there are so many people in sport who were these enforcers, were these tough guys, and now are just going through all of these problems because they didn't know how to talk about it. This was just a part of the game. And for me, like I definitely have more of a football background, and we still see like big hits, like for example, Patrick Mahomes got concussed and was back in a week. Like that really raised some red flags, because if you've had a concussion, on the best of days, like you're really lucky if you can get through it in a week. But I think we all know like that doesn't really happen. There's a lot of ebbs and flows, and so I think right now we're still dealing with this culture, as the NHL still doesn't want to, make the linkages between the repetitive head trauma and CTE, that we tend to want, that old culture is still there. It's still very present. They want that part in the game. And I think we're starting to see a lot more people realize that it actually doesn't do anything for the game. It takes away from this game that we all love. And there's so much, positives that can come from, sport and the camaraderie and even just learning like things like discipline and leadership. Like I love sports for all of that. But then when I see and I watch like games where there's fighting with bare knuckle fighting on the ice, like why is that something that we just so widely accept? Like it's mind boggling to me. And I know I kind of rambled on this question, but it's something that I don't know why we haven't found an answer to. And to this day, I think we're all trying to do our part to highlight the fact that this is a problem. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who have the final say that, think a certain way.
Yeah, and I'll add, we glorify their careers and look up to them, but they're human beings and they have lives and families to deal with, so we can't just look up to them and then forget that other part. It's really important. I'll pass off to Alley next.
Yeah, no, that was really good. I was just going to bring up the fact that unfortunately athletes have such a pressure to return to play. So like for me, I definitely didn't take time in a lot of my concussion recoveries because I was just so antsy and ready to get back because someone was going to come and take my spot easily. The longer I'm out, the harder it's going to be for me to get back into the lineup. So I definitely think that is really big just ingrained in the culture of sport is just the pressure that athletes face with returning to play. And not, taking the correct precautions of the recovery because of the stigma as well. Because of the invisible injury, people think that, after a week, you're fine. Like, why are you still milking this after a week? Because people can't see what you're actually going through. So that is a really big problem that I've experienced and seen in sport specifically. But yeah.
Thank you so much. I'll pass it off to Jake.
Sorry, I muted myself.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think as I alluded to earlier in kind of answering part of this question before, there is a culture that exists within, I think, competitive sports in general, especially at higher levels. But even in recreational sports leagues, like we experienced, Joel, especially that you did when you took time off from our team, and how your friends, like people that you thought were your friends and, that you respect, couldn't understand why you weren't coming back and playing because your injury wasn't visible, right? And so I think it's like, if you come in with a broken arm, broken leg, whatever, and if your head's in like a cast or something, people are like, okay, this person's actually hurt. Like I can understand what this person's going through. But if it's just like they look the same externally, they just don't have that same empathy unless they've gone through something like that. And so if like the rest of your team hasn't had concussions, or they don't even know what a concussion is really, or they do, but they haven't experienced it, the stigma continues. It's like, oh, you got to play through it. Oh, you got to you got to man up or whatever, like whatever the expression is. And that causes like literally people to die or to just make their problems so much worse than they have to be, unnecessarily. And I know from my own experience, like even just outside of hockey, like the stigma exists where like, where I was working at my last job, I got a concussion, I think 3 weeks into working there, probably my worst concussion ever. And I had there was no short-term time off options. And I took my 6 sick days right in a row. And then they were like, all right, time to go back to work. And I obviously wasn't ready. But I obviously just had gotten this job and I couldn't just immediately go on EI and and I basically had to force myself to go back to work before I was ready, right? And just like in hockey, just like in anything, you don't want to go past the point where, you're disappointing people or you're putting yourself in jeopardy of not being on the team. Like I'm sure Alley and Molly and Tyler have experience in playing higher levels of hockey. That puts you in jeopardy of not, staying on the team or not having your spot, be there when you come back. And so like when you obviously would otherwise want to continue recovering, you feel like you can't. And that kind of extends to all these different parts of your life. And, you know, I think because of the culture being in existence the way it is, and because of Hockey Canada not linking these two things and not really giving, you know, that credit where it's due, it causes the rest of the world to not essentially know anything about what these people need in terms of recovery. Like until the movie Concussion came out, nobody really knew anything about all this stuff and what CTE was, or what all these different, you know, NFL players were dealing with and how it was affecting their lives and making them suicidal. It's kind of shocking to me that it took that long, but it's because all these sports leagues are kind of hiding a lot of information and trying to make it a stigma because it's not in their best interest of putting money in their pockets, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and I still get asked from people on that team to come back every year that don't understand. And I talked before about sense of belonging. That's why I stopped going to watch, because I can't get asked the same question every week. You look fine, come out there. And I just didn't want to deal with it. I'll pass it off to Tyler next.
Yeah, I have a lot I want to say, and I'm trying to remember everything. Alley, you touched on some good stuff about return to play and some of the pressure, but I think it's important to highlight too for folks who are watching later, that pressure isn't really like pressure from your teammates like, oh, you're faking it, or like, come on, play hurt. It's more so, hey, you're a part of our family. We want you back. We need you. You contribute, right? That's why you're there. So it's really important to highlight that and to show that side of it too. It's not peer pressure negatively, in at least inside my experiences. It's always been, hey, like, we need you on the blue line. Like, you know, we miss you. We need that sense of leadership in the locker room, or whatever my role is. I play a certain role, and you know, if I can't produce, and if I'm in the stands, or if I'm at home, depending on the injury, if they're on the road, you know, my job is open to be taken. And unless you're a franchise player, your job's replaceable. And I'm obviously not a franchise player, but you know, that is a thought that goes through everyone's mind when you're playing is, you know, if I go down, it doesn't matter the amount of time, they got to call someone up. Someone else has to get sent down. You can't get sent down, obviously, if you're on the IR. But you know, you have to battle back and show that you're there and you're ready to go. And that process could be very, very hard. Seth, I wanted to ask you something. You don't believe that there's a place for aggression, physicality, fighting in hockey?
I wouldn't necessarily say to that extent. I think fighting, specifically, I don't think there is a place. I know it was kind of birthed within the culture of hockey. Um, I just think it, you know, does it really serve the game? Like, the game's about, you know, scoring, trying to win. And like, yes, fighting can give you an edge. And like I, you know, talked about it, it brings momentum, but at what cost? Now, in terms of like the physical aspect, like there are ways that you can get taught to, you know, hit and be aggressive in a clean way. And, you know, we're still seeing, you know, so many hits from behind. You know, I remember when we were like kids, like there was a stop sign on the back of jerseys that we'd have to like notice. So I think it's to what extent. And I know we'll talk about it later in terms of like the player safety, but being way more strict on what, you know, what their leeway is to classify what is a legal hit and what is an illegal hit. And I think right now there's so much gray area with that, because they're trying to create a lot of this, you know, excitement through it. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that.
I respectfully disagree. I really think that maybe at the Bantam, midget, high school, sometimes even junior level, that's important, but you don't make it to the top of the world leagues without knowing how to hit, how to protect yourself. You know, even if you get forced into fighting, you have at training camp, you go through drills and practicing with the fighting coach of how to protect yourself, what to do. And I think it's really important, because you're talking about fighting, you know, aside getting, like what you said, aside getting guys like momentum. I think there's a big place for it in the game. To win a game, it's more than just scoring a goal, it's stopping. And let's say you're on my line and you get absolutely hammered, open ice hit, clean hit, just open ice. So there's a lot of force and trauma there to you, perhaps. But what am I supposed to do there? Well, like if I'm on your line, do I just let that happen? And then the next shift that happens again, and maybe you get hurt? Like, what am I supposed to do? I need to intervene. I need to step up. I need to protect and say, hey, you know what? Like, it's a big open ice hit, but now he's making 2 or 3 of them. Like, you have to jump in and intervene. So I think you don't make it to the NHL, the American League, in Europe, the KHL, the Coast, those leagues, you don't make it there and you don't play like an idiot, because if you do, you're going to get suspended, you're going to get fined, you're going to have a target painted on you. You know, I think it's more so for youth when they're learning how to hit, they're learning how to be aggressive, their bodies are changing, they're getting bigger, stronger, faster. You know, a Bantam could be 6 foot, 200 pounds, and there could be a 5'6", 115 pounder. There's going to be a lot more injuries there. And that's why they need to stop Sutton on their back, because you don't see guys hitting each other in the back in the NHL like they do in, you know, midget or Bantam hockey, just because, like I said, they're there for a reason, and they know after so much time, like, you can't do that stuff. There are repercussions. I don't want to monopolize the talk, and we can talk more about this later if anyone wants to ask more, but personal thought for me is just like, I think it's really important to keep that side, but there are ways to do it smart, and there are ways to maybe, you know, look at changes that can be implemented moving forward with keeping things safe and making sure guys can still be aggressive, stick up for one another, and make sure that they're protected.
Yeah, that stuff will whether you take fighting out or not will always happen. I think it's about creating certain ways to take away the improvised fights, the ones before that necessarily don't have an impact on the game. And then, as Seth was alluding to, you look more at the terms of the safety of hits, how they're not calling headshots, stuff like that. And then I think once you do both of them together, it'll create more of a safer environment. I'll pass it off to Molly next.
Yeah, just not to harp on that. I do think I'm not necessarily a fan of fighting in hockey, because I'm much more of a fan of watching the skill and the physicality. But I do think there is a place for it, and I think enforcing the rules that are in place is the place to start, as opposed to starting to implement new rules. Like, if we're actually going to say no headshots, like, let's actually implement that before you feel the need to drop the gloves and pound somebody because they were taking a cheap shot at your line mate. But in terms of I was writing a couple of things down as we were talking about this idea of glorifying injuries and playing through it. And the thing that struck me is the Harvard hockey program. Our mantra was team first. And there's this culture of everything you do puts the team ahead of yourself. Great. I'm all about that. That creates a phenomenal team atmosphere. But the problem with that is anytime you say something that is not rah, all about the team, it can be seen as complaining. And especially in women's sports, you don't want to be the one who's sitting there complaining about how you feel. And that's a problem when you've got somebody like me or a teammate who has had a concussion, is trying to come back, and is trying to articulate to other teammates who may not get it that I don't necessarily feel 100% or I'm not there. It's a really fine line between being able to talk about what you're feeling personally and not risking not being team first. And that was a really hard line for me to learn to walk, because when I came back to school, I had lost my spot essentially because I had to take a full year away from school. So there was another freshman goalie who came in while I was gone. So now I was a sophomore at the same time she was. So there's all sorts of complexities around being able to advocate for yourself without taking away from what you contribute and doing your job essentially for the team.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I'll pass it off to Ryan next.
There we go. Sorry, muted. But yeah, so I was pretty interested in what Alley was saying, and she touched upon briefly about pressure. And I definitely know when I was going through my concussions, the conversation around what I was going through was more like, when are you getting back to play? When are you going to come join us? And that's even, I believe, Tyler was saying that, that the experience that he had was more that, when are you going to be back into the family? And I totally get that. But when, in terms of what I went through, it was more of like, there was a lot of lack of understanding of what that actually was that I was going through, that it seemed like it was more along the lines of, you're not with us, like you're an outsider, like, come on, you got to come in, and join us. You're fine, you look fine, you can play, like I've seen you walking around, you're watching all the games, what's wrong with you, sort of thing. So yeah, it all stems from a lack of education, and that's where the culture and even awareness to that extent, but that's where the culture that I was subject to in a small town growing up, that we were all about the rough and tough style of hockey. Like everything was geared towards being the toughest team out there. So like we had a rule implemented within our team that was, our trainer said, nobody's allowed to stay on the ice if you get hurt. You have to skate back to our bench. Like he basically, because he didn't want to go out there and actually treat anybody. But essentially, so only one person, and it was the coach's son, who laid down on the ice that whole year. Everybody came off, and like it was wild. So we were really trying to be the toughest team out there. And I can remember my one friend, especially, he was on my line for most of the years that I played hockey, and he was my protector in a lot of ways. He was that guy who was just out there hitting every single person, and I was the more skilled player. So he really took that upon himself to be that guy who was out there hitting, setting the tone for our team. And I just remember so many times, and it still gives me chills now, where he would come on the bench and I'd look down and be like, dude, are you okay? Like, your eyes are not there. I'm trying to talk to you and you're just not listening. Or like, how about you take a sit out here? Like, how about you take this shift off? And he's like, no, gotta go back in. And I would be like, I would even point to the coaches sometimes and be like, what's going on here? And nothing would change. And unfortunately, like, people are still dealing with those repercussions years later, and we haven't played like in 5+ years. So yeah, that's a lot of where my history comes and why I'm so passionate about this topic, especially as it relates to hockey, is just because the culture I was subject to when I was younger was very hypermasculine, lack of education, lack of awareness on the injury, and almost a blatant disregard in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's my piece.
Yeah, and for me, I always, as a smaller hockey player, I always had a fight or flight mentality because I always thought I was a target. I mean, I never really played that high up level, but even just going through minor hockey, and then when I played in university and started playing contact hockey, like that's when it really started realizing that like I loved the sport, but I didn't belong because I couldn't. I had guys trying to take runs at me every shift, and like I consider myself a skilled player, and that wasn't the hockey I not that I didn't enjoy, but just wasn't what I grew up playing. And then I got to men's league, and it was even worse. I had a bunch of people that just were used to playing that style of hockey and would try and take my head off every game. And I would explain, like I'm a person, I have a life to live, I have to go to work the next day, and I had to stop playing because even the people on my own team didn't understand that. So that's really what kind of that topic means to me. I'll open up to the group now.
Yeah, it's interesting, as we're talking about this, I'm gaining a lot of perspective, and I'm also thinking, when we're watching the game, and for someone who grew up in Toronto as a fan of Montreal, and you see, certain things happen, represent Alley, I love it. It's never, you're always cheering for your team's side. You're always putting that bias, and you're never looking at the individual. I remember specifically, the one moment that comes to mind is, I don't remember when Max Pacioretty was on Montreal and he got hit into the boards by Zdeno Chara.
Yeah.
And dirty.
So you're always gonna have both sides, because I remember so many people were like, "Oh, he had it coming," but like, and I would just look at them being like, "That's your response to this guy laying on the ground, blood coming from his face, like that's what we're first thinking." He's like, "Oh, he had it coming. Oh, he's a Habs player. He just like, it was never like, is he okay? Like, what's going on?" And like, you can go, whether you're watching the game, live, like in the stadium, or, you're at a bar, you're just with friends, like you're going to have everyone's different thoughts and opinions about one hit. And it seems to never be about the actual individual and if they're okay. And it's just, it goes back to that glorifying, that culture that hockey's created where, you're with the team or you're not. And that's the same with fans in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's just been an interesting perspective, and I've enjoyed hearing everyone's take on this.
Yeah, and I think even for me, and just remembering back about Don Cherry's Rock'em Sock'ems, like, oh my God, was that ever something that perpetuated the culture? I think everybody's laughing here because we know, like the trolley tracks, like it was a thing, and he definitely glorified it for everybody. And yeah, even like you said, Seth, then the first question is never, is he okay or is she okay? Which is now watching hockey and seeing all these people get hurt and the headshots and Brian Burke just being like, that was not a headshot when clearly the guy's elbow was right there. Yeah, there's definitely a culture change needed. And luckily there's no Rock'em Sock'ems coming out this year and for the last few years. So it's clearly happening. But yeah, I think physicality in hockey is always going to be there. It's just to what extent, right? And just the players having more empathy for one another and understanding the things that we're talking about, like the life after the game and like the life even after that single game. Like, how are you going to feel later that night? So yeah, that's kind of where I'm thinking.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one thing that was mentioned before between Seth and Tyler. I think a lot of it has to do with tradition, right? History and tradition, I think, play into everything more than we really realize. Like, if you think about football is like as more violent than hockey in terms of the hitting, right? Like some of the vicious headshots that you see and the speed at which people are hitting each other. It's not like, in certain ways, not at like with the boards and everything. There's not as high like degree of injury with certain respects to that. But if like in the beginning of the time when football was created, if people are allowed to take their helmets off and just go bare knuckle box each other, we wouldn't think that would be a big deal. But now when there's like football fights that break out at that, and that never happens, like guys keep their helmets on and they still like smash each other, and they like, it's really not something that you ever see. And when you see it, you're like, whoa, that's crazy. Whereas like hockey has always had fighting in it, always had this like understanding of like this gritty, like hard-nosed game where you're sticking up for your teammates and you're like taking exception to hits and all this stuff. And that's how it's always been. And so to Tyler's point, it's hard to kind of picture it without that, because it's been that way for over 125 years or whatever it is, right? Longer. And so like I kind of am the mix of both worlds. I'm like, there's stigmas and there's like things that should be changed, or evolution of sport happens, right? Like in all sports, to make the game more fun or exciting for fans, but maybe to make it more safe as well. I kind of see it from both perspectives, to kind of take it out or keep it in, to stick up to your teammates or to not, and how it's the only sport that you do that in, where you like fight someone because something happened to your teammate. It's very interesting. It's very unique, and I appreciate both perspectives on it.
It's crazy. ESPN did a study, I don't know how long ago, handful of years ago, and they did a finding, and you can look this up, it's pretty cool. They did a finding that although NFL players are 20% bigger, NHL hits are 17% harder.
That makes sense because of the speed.
The momentum.
Right?
It's so fast, right? So you look at speed, you look at the game. We try to combat that, like Jake, you're saying, ways to change and develop. So Olympic ice, bigger ice sheets, even faster. Like in Europe, it's guys are flying, like just, and so it's been interesting to see, especially geographically too, in Finland, in the La Liga in Finland, fighting and hitting is a lot more prominent than in the Swedish Hockey League or the DEL, the DEL. The KHL is kind of a mix of everything, but it's just been really interesting to see all these different leagues handle it all different. it's pretty interesting, and it's pretty cool to talk about. I'm sure we'll get to that later at topic 4.
Just out of curiosity, where did you feel safest playing, knowing the difference in the game and all those different places that you've played?
It's a great question. Honestly, I thought I was safest in North America in the most physical games because I knew what to expect. In Europe, anything can happen at any time. In Canada is pretty similar to the US, but like especially this last year pro, our physical games, when you're playing at that level, you can kind of decide if you want to be that physical and fight or not. It's really easy to avoid if you want to at that level, because there are guys on the team who really don't mind. They're not scared of getting punched in the face. They know that if someone hurts someone or just, being rough, like their personality, they're a rough player. So it's been interesting because in the US or in North America specifically, in those situations where it's going to be a rough game, you just have to make sure that you're ready. You're always checking your back. You're not putting yourself in physical opportunities to get hurt, to get ran. You're not standing 3 feet from the wall when a forechecker's coming in. You're hugging the boards. You have your elbow out to protect you if someone tries to raise their hands to your jaw. It's a lot easier, I thought, in North America to be safer. Though, guys are bigger and more physical here in North America than in Europe, I found for myself personally.
No, it's a really interesting perspective. I'm just looking at time-wise. I don't know if we'll get to all 8 questions. So we'll go on to topic number 3 here, and that is the loss of identity after either retiring or being forced to stop competing because of concussions. So I'll pass that off to Ryan first.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I didn't necessarily lose my own identity, which is I'm really happy with, obviously, but it was because my mom always reinforced in me that I'm a student and a hockey player, and I'm a lot more of a person outside of hockey. So luckily I have that background, but I know I'm not, or I'm lucky compared to a lot of people that I grew up with and a lot of people out there, because their lives have been like as far as they could, they would play hockey. So they play until they're 22 as an overager, or you play as long as you can just to keep that juice going in your blood, right? And then afterwards, there's definitely a dip in finding who you are, and you got to go through it. And some people are a lot more successful than others at battling through it. And you see it a lot nowadays, especially at the pro level, where people are going back into the league in some capacity because that's just all they know. I actually am excited to talk to Tyler about this because he's diving into one of his passions after hockey. And I think that's something that I would love to explore in the future, is just trying to help people transition from hockey specifically to finding their passion in life outside of the game.
Yeah, it's very important. I'll pass it off to Molly.
Yeah, this one's a super interesting one for me because I took a hiatus from hockey with regards to, as a result of my concussion, but I eventually went back and finished out my 4 years, and that was the end of my hockey career. And so it was one of those things where I knew it was coming. And so I had already started thinking about what was next for me and finding something that I was excited about in the job that I'm still working. And what I recognized in my teammates who, whether they had to stop playing because of concussions, and there were a bunch of them, or the inevitable senior night is over and see you later to your hockey career, the earlier you start to think about and realize and accept and own the fact that there's a shelf life to being an athlete, the better off I think we are going to be as people when that time inevitably comes. Because when you don't think about it, and when you go with the mentality of, well, I'm a hockey player, and so that's the only thing that I'm going to focus on for this part of my life, which I also had teammates who didn't have internships between years of college, all they were doing is, I'm a hockey player. When that came to an end, there was a holy shit moment for them. And the earlier we can start accepting and talking about the fact that being a hockey player doesn't have to be the only thing in your life, even if you're a professional, I think the better off everybody who plays the game is going to be.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. Tyler, I'll pass it off to you.
Perfect. I was like starting to write down like my thoughts, so I wouldn't. I am getting sharp again. My brain is coming back, but yeah, I mean, you brought up a lot of stuff, Molly, that I really liked. I think of this analogy. You guys have all been hurt and sidelined, right? So when you're sidelined, what's the first thing you want to do? You wish like heck you could be out there playing. And for me, it was really, really interesting because I had shoulder injuries, I had shoulder surgeries, hip surgery, hernia surgeries, and the concussions. So, you know, if it's on the off season and I miss training camp or even in the middle of the season, I had to be sidelined. And that time made me think. When I had to take some years off of hockey to get help mentally, that made me think of like, at that time I was thinking I could never play hockey again. Or when I was playing and I was hurt, I was thinking, you know what, like I want to play so bad. But at some point, like Molly said, you have to accept that your career at that level will be done. Doesn't mean you can't play in men's league. It doesn't mean you can't coach your kids or volunteer coach high school or whatever that is. But luckily for me, you know, my dad played collegiate hockey and some in Europe. And ever since I started, he kind of thought hockey was just going to be a hobby of mine starting so late. And he always told my sister and I, she played a little bit too, like, this is going to be over before you know it. And whatever you do, like whatever you do for work, just pursue what you love and it will work out. That's what he did after hockey is he decided to be a pilot because he knew he wanted to be a pilot. And he just retired and he loved his job. And so growing up while I was playing, you know, I didn't have that situation at the rink when I was 8 years old, not wanting to go, or, you know, even 10 or 11 years old, not wanting to go. When I decided on my own to play hockey as a 12-year-old, I loved it. I was up at 5 a.m. to go skate and work out and work on my hands and shoot pucks. I couldn't stay away from the rink. So I already had so much other experiences growing up that I continued to do in my off seasons, not leaving like that side of me. That was my identity early on, was a kid who loves to be outside, a kid who loves school, a kid that loves to play with his friends. That was important to me. And I continued to have that my whole career, which was really lucky of me. I just made time for it. People say, oh, you know, I wish there was more hours in a day. I disagree. I love every hour because I take advantage of every hour and I plan what I do. So it was really interesting because when I was playing, I started to develop more about my personality and said, I like to write, I like to travel, I like to photograph. I want to start my own business. So when I was playing, I started a business in the off season to stay busy. And, you know, there I am, you know, climbing mountains and backcountry skiing in South America during our summer. It's their winter. And so I was staying in shape, which was great for hockey. Though I wasn't working on my power skating and my hands were a little, there were rocks on my first day back. I was in shape. You know, it was really, really cool. So when it got to that level collegiately and professionally, even professionally, like most of the guys take the summer off just to relax and train a little bit. I got to still stay in shape by traveling the world and go do other cool things. So it's different. I feel like a lot of my teammates didn't have that. And a lot of them talked to me like, what do I do? Like, you know, I'm 33 years old. I played in the show. I played in the Olympics. This is all I know. You know, they don't have that identity. That identity is wrapped up as who they are as an athlete, what, you know, their career. And it's a really tough thing. And I could talk so much about this from all the experiences that I've had and discussions I've had with teammates and even guys that have recently retired who I've talked to about the program coming in of like, what do you think of this coach? And they talk to me, but it's just been really interesting. So, I mean, if there's questions, I'd love to answer from my perspective, but if not, we can just move on to the next person.
No, I appreciate that. At the end, we'll just bring you back in and we'll continue that, Tyler. But you did bring up a really important point, and I feel like that's so reflective of the hockey community, specifically the competitive one, is that you have all these parents who are so zoned in on the kid playing hockey. They're on the ice 12 months of the year. They aren't living anything else that is outside of the hockey rink. So it is important to develop those skills and hobbies that you can, have something to look at later in life, exactly like Tyler has, where you can sink his teeth into and really enjoy it. I think that's really great. Pass it on to Jake.
Yeah, this is I would say this is like, as Joel knows, this is probably the most important aspect, I think, of this conversation for me, and the thing that I think about the most, to be honest with you, in a weird way. Joel and I, well, actually, previous to Joel and I working on it, about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when I was in college, I pitched a sports documentary show idea to my class, literally called Living After the Dream, Life After Sports. The idea that, like Tyler said, like Molly said, like everyone here said, like the identity, like you form your whole identity, a lot of people over this one sport, this one thing you're doing for so much of your life. And in Tyler's case, he was lucky to have a father and supportive family that showed him another path beyond hockey after he retired, right? That being a hockey player wasn't his identity, that he should focus on other passions while playing hockey in order to have a career and a path beyond an identity and a personality and, all these things that a lot of kids don't have. Unfortunately, a lot of kids growing up have parents that are vicariously trying to win through them, trying to push them beyond their means so that they can, feel some type of glory, that they never got, or that they, had stifled in their upbringing or something like that, right? That happens a lot. You see that a lot with really overbearing parents, and Tyler's like one of the lucky ones, to be honest with you. That really doesn't happen for a lot of people. And that's something that, like, to me, when I was, 10 years ago, was so incredibly weird and unique, that people are retiring at 30 years old, 35 years old, sometimes younger. If you're Gordie Howe or Jaromir Jagr, you got lucky and you kept your body in good shape, but that's like the exception to the rule. And, and just the idea that you could, form your whole life around this one thing, and then suddenly you're retired and you're like, what the fuck am I doing, right? Where am I going from here, And because of that, it's such an interesting kind of like perspective to have, and it's unique to only athletes, professional athletes. Like nobody else really goes through that, right? Like musicians have 50 plus year careers, like, and people start careers at 30 years old when athletes are ending them, right? And so it's always been very interesting to me. And as someone who never actually picked one sport, and kind of, was competitive in all the sports I played at high levels in most of the sports I played. But because I was never really into one sport, I think I could see it from this perspective more growing up, because I was like, what are all these people doing with their lives after they're done with this sport when, they've done nothing else? Like, I'm a drummer, I'm also a videographer, I'm a cook, like I'm going to start my own business. Like I'm actually, I consider myself a Jake of all trades, like I do all these different things because of the fact that I never really chose one path. And it allowed me to kind of see, I guess, the danger in doing that, especially in sports. And so it's really like one of the most interesting things I could think about when it comes to sports and identity and forming a life afterwards. And part of the reason I got involved in this project, to be honest with you, is to talk with people like Tyler and Alley and Molly, and people who have lived these lives and now are transitioning to a new passion, a new project for themselves, a new identity, and how they were able to help other people, within their networks kind of do the same, or the people they talk to and how they're dealing with it. It's so, to me, it's so weird, and it's so something that I know nothing really about, other than the fact that I know it exists. And that's why I wanted to be a part of this show and talk to more people about it, really to highlight, athletes who are like retired now, and you forget all about them, right? And how unique some of their new lives are. Like Cliff Robinson, who was, an NBA star who recently passed away. He like started his own marijuana, CBD company and got into real estate, and same thing with Jamal Mashburn. Like he's a real estate mogul now, MBA, and you know, all these different people that you think of, you're like, whoa, whatever happened to this guy? Well, now he's doing that. I just thought that was one of the coolest things that I could ever kind of think about creating a vision or a perspective for people to see. And yeah, I'm just love to hear more about your perspectives, all the people that are now transitioning to new lives.
Perfect. And I'll pass it off to Alley next.
Yeah. Just speaking from my own experience, I think one of the hardest things for me transitioning out of hockey was the fact that it just came to such an abrupt end, which I had no control over. It just left such a bitter taste in my mouth that I put everything into this sport, like my whole life into it, and that's how it ends. I was just like, are you kidding me right now? But as you go on, like, I think one of the hardest things for me was just being in that environment still. Like I was still going to the same university, like trying to go to the rink still, and just being around the girls and not isolating myself. But that made it so much harder. But as soon as I got out of university, I just kind of found new passions, like putting it into the research side of things. Like I've learned that I'm so passionate about research. I also learned that I'm very passionate about skiing as well. And there's just so much more to life than hockey. It doesn't seem like it at the time when you're playing. Like you go to the rink every day, the team's your life, it's a family. But when you're transitioning out of that, you realize that there is a lot out there other than hockey.
For sure. And I know for my own sake, you said about going to the rink and still not feeling like you belong. It was the same for me. I just wanted to be there, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah, exactly. Like at first I tried to go, and then I just realized that it just made me more and more miserable being there and seeing people do the things that I wish I could be doing, right?
Yeah, it's very tough.
Yeah, exactly.
Pass it off to Seth.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting question for me because, you know, the moment I stopped growing was the same moment all of my dreams to play, you know, in a professional level kind of went with that. And so I had already known that my senior year of high school was going to be the last time I was going to be able to play at a competitive level. Unfortunately, it was obviously the year I got my diagnosed concussion. I had to miss half the season. And then my coach never looked at me the same. And I'm not going to go down that whole rabbit hole, but, you know, I had that perspective already where I knew I wasn't going to be playing sports anymore. And I already was in that transitioning phase. And at the time, the only thing that was logical to me was, you know, I have this passion for sports. Why don't I just go to sport management and learn the business side and try to approach it that way? Now, 7 years later, I don't think if you would have told me then that my biggest passion would be to start a nonprofit, I would have, you know, necessarily understood that. And it's funny how life works. But, you know, I've talked to a lot of people on this journey who played hockey in a professional and competitive level. And, you know, there's this common theme where it's like, if you don't eat, sleep, and breathe hockey, you know, you don't really get looked at the same, or you're looked at different if you try to, you know, do certain things like go do photography and share that on Instagram. Like it gets looked at a little differently. And when you think about, you know, the big four sports in North America, I mean, basketball, you see so much more like character. You see, you know, these individuals, and we're starting to see that a bit more with football, not so much baseball, but in hockey, it's really, you don't see that part of people's lives. And they really, they keep it kind of to themselves, and they keep themselves siloed in this hockey culture because that's, you know, they're just trying to be their best, you know, as Tyler mentions, like you're trying to work on your skills, you know, to prepare yourself even in the off season. So it's definitely, you know, an interesting thing for athletes when we're going through it. And I can't really speak on, you know, the professional side of this experience, but, you know, I really believe that we live in a world right now where there's just so much opportunity, and you have the chance now on this virtual world to pick up and try new things and find passions you never knew you had. Like I didn't know I was ever going to be a video editor or a content creator. And now I love doing that. And it was all just because of a decision I made. And I really encourage people and especially athletes who feel like they're in the rut and they're not sure what they want to do, to be open-minded and try new things. You're not just going to pick up one thing and love it just as much as hockey, but you can still find passion in so many different aspects in life. And it will show you, as we're hearing now from all these amazing speakers, that you're more than just a hockey player. And I think that's such a big thing that needs to get hit home with this next generation of athletes. It's like, we want you to succeed and be the best that you can in this sport, but this is not what defines you. And you can take a lot of those skills from success and use it in your life and convert it to social media. If you were really big on the fitness side, in your training, try and take what you learn and start, advertising that on social media. Like that landscape, all you need is one video on TikTok to blow up and your whole life could change. Right. So, and I'm kind of rambling on there, but the point I'm trying to hit is like, we're not just athletes. We're so much more to that. And we need to be reminded sometimes. And I think this is a great conversation to do that.
Well, that's a really good point. And I'll add, within the hockey world, especially in the professional level, you look at a guy like PK Subban, who's, shunned all the time for being expressive and showing himself and doing Instagram videos and TikToks and things that maybe not necessarily on the ice, but he gets destroyed for it. And really, I think that's an interesting point. And the topic for myself, the way I look at it is, it's routine for me. I was on a hockey team from when I was 5 years old through university, through 2 men's leagues team after. And I wasn't just simply a hockey player on the team. I was the team administrator for my intramural all the way through men's league team. I did the game sheets. I bought the pucks. I knew every single referee, every timekeeper. It wasn't just like I was going to rink to play hockey. It was so routine. I would eat cereal before every game. I had so many things that it was just who I was. And even just stopping playing and going to the rink and being there, I just felt like I was a completely different person. I couldn't enjoy those routines. I couldn't even enjoy being the place that I loved and truly wanted to be at. So yeah, it was for me, it was just such a false sense of identity because I still feel like that person, but it's so hard to show it and express it now. So that's what I really feel like is the loss of identity part. And we'll open up to the group now. Okay, perfect. So we'll move on to the next talk then. This one's an interesting one. I'm curious what everyone will think. So we'll put it as a fan perspective now. So if every one of us here was named the head of the Department of Player Safety in the NHL, what type of rules would you implement to change? And we'll start with Seth up top.
Well,
are you gonna say it, Seth? Are you gonna do it? You gonna eliminate fighting?
Look, to me, I see fighting definitely in a different scope, and I really appreciate, Tyler, your perspective, and I think it's important that we all have our own opinions and thoughts towards this. Yeah, I can obviously go the route where I think fighting should be out of the game. I think there are a lot of other ways that you can defend your teammate. And we see it in sports like football, basketball, and baseball. Like there are a lot of times where things get crossed the line, and the moment a fight breaks out, everyone comes to stop it. Whereas in hockey, we just sit and watch and wait for it to happen to resolve a moment to maybe have that excitement, that pride, where it's like, yes, I get that you're sticking up for your teammate when something wrong happened. In football, we were taught you do that in different ways, and it's different in tradition. And I think what Jake mentioned is a really important aspect to it. For me, though, if I was the head of the player safety, I really would, try and eliminate the ambiguity of what is determined as an illegal hit. Like, I mentioned earlier, I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, and one of the first games of the season, they were playing Vancouver, and there was a clear hit that led to an injury of a concussion. And it was like a slap on the wrist. It's, Tyler Myers, you didn't deserve a suspension. Like, keep playing. And what message does that send? And I'm not saying if you suspend him for a full season, it's going to, make that same message, but we have to just have a bit of a better narrative to those types of hits that are clearly controversial, and not have, as Ryan mentioned, Brian Burke saying, "Oh, I think it was fine." Well, if we're having this conversation, then clearly something wasn't fine in this hit. Right. And I think that's the important thing that needs to be addressed. Like, if the conversation gets to that point where we're asking Brian Burke, then we've already lost. Is in plain way to put it. So I don't know if I have, the answer to this question. I think there's a lot that needs to be changed. And I think honestly, the first thing would be trying to make sure that everyone in hockey can understand that repetitive head trauma is linked to CTE, and we can kind of just put that out there so it's not, again, ambiguous to these athletes, to this sport. But yeah, those are my 2 cents.
No, I completely agree with that. It shouldn't be taboo to say that because that is the reality. We'll pass to Alley.
Yeah, I read a super great book. It's called Game Change by Ken Dryden. I don't know if anyone. Such a good book. If you haven't read it, I really urge you to do so. I found it brought up a lot of good points changes that the NHL could make. One being the concussion baseline testing. I mean, players routinely fake good or fake bad just so they can, outsmart the system and get back to play. There definitely needs to be more advanced measures for baseline testing, and then obviously post-concussion testing as well. There was actually 2 doctors who basically pitched something to Gary Bettman, and it was baseline testing using an fMRI. So you can't fake that. And then the players would actually do tasks, and they met with him, and he seemed really into it, but then completely ghosted them afterwards because he's just not into doing that, right? It's too expensive, even though the NHL has money that they can use towards this type of stuff. Another thing that Tyler touched on before that was mentioned in this book is the ice surface. Making it that Olympic size would even just help the collision rate. Like the ice surface right now, those guys are so fast and so big and strong that when they're hitting each other in such a small space like that, the damage is going to be even worse. If you look at the Olympics, it's amazing hockey, but there's not as much body contact in it. And that's because of the ice surface. It's not less enjoyable to watch, but I know there is that argument in the NHL. A lot of people do watch NHL for that rock'em sock'em hockey. Personally, I was a very aggressive player, so I definitely sat some people down in my days, but there is a place for that, obviously, and doing it in the right way. But yeah, just education as well is huge as well.
Yeah, I know that's a really good point. The education, I think, is something that definitely can improve. Jake, pass down to you.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because I see it from both perspectives, as I said before. I think it's something that, I agree with Tyler that I think at the younger ages, just like in football, they could take out a lot of the hitting that goes on and a lot of the tackling until people are of an age where their brain is developed enough and they themselves are smart enough to take feedback and coaching in a better, applicable scenario. I think that would also limit people's, potential to get concussions at a young age and throw off the rest of their lives, and just have them be in a better place to actually play contact sports and limit the amount of damage that they do. So I think it starts from from a childhood perspective. But if I was in the NHL right now, being the commissioner, dealing with the people that are currently competing there, I would obviously create much better tests and much better kind of systems to be in place for people to actually get help and support, and just have more lifelines for them. And I think right now, because the NHL is just denying the repetitive head trauma and CTE connection in the first place, that's where I would start. I'd be like, well, we're not denying this anymore. We're just gonna put it out there and be like, if you want to play hockey, these are the risks. Just like football, they did that, and I think the NHL kind of hides behind this veil of male, white male bravado. And I think that also something that I would completely abolish and bring a lot more awareness to that, and bring a lot more diversity into the game as well, which I think would also help eliminate stigmas within mental health and all that kind of stuff as well.
It's almost like they created the perception that the players know the risks, but the fans shouldn't know the risk. And I think that's where it would definitely need to change. Tyler, to you.
Yeah, you guys have all said a lot of important things. Joel, that last statement especially is interesting because, yeah, when you play, you know the risk. When I started, I didn't realize it was my first contact sport ever. I didn't realize I was going to get smoked until I got knocked out. And then I was like, oh, so I'm allowed to use my body. It's kind of like right now, I play in a co-ed soccer league with my wife. My wife was a big time soccer player collegiately. And it's funny because my second nature is to throw my hips and to put myself to take away time and space. And I've been doing that in this co-ed league and I'm getting all in trouble. And I'm like, I'm not like hitting guys open field, like, but it's just kind of funny. You know the risk when you play, you take it. Man, I feel like I can't really give an answer. You guys have all said some really good stuff, but like who am I to put myself in that situation? I can't even begin to think of all the rules. Like if you guys you can go online and download I can even put in the group chat like the NHL's protocols for concussions. The NHL's like a lot of these files are downloadable and it's really interesting to scroll through and read. You start to realize when you read them like I have, you realize how complicated and how intricate and how much time and details they put into all of this. Honestly, from though I've never played in the show, I've never played in the American League, I've played with an affiliate though, they take care of their guys. And it may not always seem like it, but I really, really feel like they're headed in a great direction. And the NHL is doing some amazing things. The coaches, the GMs, the commissioner, everyone on board, and they're getting neurologists involved. They're getting a lot of medical experts involved to do studies. And I mean, Ali probably knows a lot more than I do about the technical science of it, but I really personally, I don't know the deep details. So I think from what I've perceived talking with teammates and friends that have played in the show, they all have had really good things to say. I know there's a couple issues that it's not really my place to touch on, but there are some litigations that are outstanding currently occurring. And I have a couple friends in that litigation that are, their careers were cut short. One of them was a Bruin, and he was the oldest rookie to make a NHL roster on opening day. He was like 32 years old, Bobby Robbins. He was a tough guy, and his career's ended playing. He now coaches in Minnesota and he teaches the kids he coaches all about identity. It's really cool. But yeah, I mean, all in all, I wouldn't really change much, but I do gotta say, Seth, I'm not picking on you, I swear, but I gotta stick up for Berkey because he's an Edina boy. Brian Burke's from Edina and played at Edina before Providence and before going to Harvard. So I feel like he gets a bad rap a lot, but he really is doing some incredible things. Every player that's played for him pretty much loves him. And he's done amazing work with Toronto, although it was pretty tough to see. And then he's done amazing work with the United States Olympic team too. So it's really cool when you hear names like that being dropped from your buddies who've played in that organization or for a guy like that. And they go in detail and lengths about, what we hear about is only surface level. It's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on that not many of us actually know about. So it's pretty interesting. I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of those meetings though. That'd be cool.
I'll add on the Burke topic from I know from Seth and from us, we strictly see him just on TV in Toronto, and it's a whole different ball game the way he talks than as opposed to the way he deals with his players. And I know that because you can see it the way he expresses himself. And I've read a couple books about him and stories, and I do completely agree that he is a great person and does deal with the players great. I just think he has this media persona that's completely different, almost in a Don Cherry role, and that's where he gets himself in trouble. Now pass it off to Molly.
So a couple of things on this has been, I think Tyler's point about who am I to make that kind of a judgment. That was the first time I had ever thought that, because as a player, you assume you know everything. I just now was like, yeah, maybe I should reconsider what my answer was. But the other thing that Alley, you mentioned, make the ice bigger, and you get less less collisions and it could make the game safer. The big problem with that, and again, I work in the business of sport, the big problem with bigger ice is fewer seats, which means you're making less money. And that's a major driver for any league, especially when you talk about the big four and the NHL being at the bottom of the barrel with increasing fans and growing the game. It's a massive, massive hurdle to get over. But I think now that I've had some time to rethink what my initial answer was, I think if I was in charge of player safety, I would start with making clear, like Seth said, what is and is not considered a penalty and a suspendable hit. So again, if the NHL wants to talk about, zero tolerance policy, enforce the zero tolerance policy and make the consequences visible and equal across all players. The other thing that I have heard and seen, not necessarily in the NHL level, but at the college level, is independent doctors who are not affiliated with the team and a group of your peers. When you're trying to come back and you're trying to get cleared, having a group of your teammates look you in the eye and say, Molly, you're not there yet. You still come in the back of the rink when all of the rest of us are walking in the front. Or you look like you're moving the wrong way on the power play. Like, what's the deal with that? I think it's easy to cheat the system when you talk about concussion baseline and scat testing and all that other stuff. It's really difficult to cheat the people who you live and breathe and play with every single day. And that was a really big thing for me when I had teammates who were concussed and when I was concussed in college. It's really difficult to fool the people who know you best, and implementing some sort of peer review before somebody decides they're okay to get back on the ice. Whether or not it would work, I don't know, but it's just an idea that I've been thinking about, again, just from my own experience of those people who look you in the eye and say, I don't think you're doing it yet. It could help.
Yeah, a teammate shouldn't be afraid to speak up if he sees something's wrong with another teammate. That's a really good point. Now pass off to Ryan.
Yeah, honestly, I was definitely on the same plane as Molly in the thinking of just like the accountability of you and your teammates, and having that accountability framework kind of developed into some sort of program, whether it be a mental health and concussion program, where it's not creating a buddy system, because obviously I feel like everybody would scoff at that idea, but just creating some system where you at least check in with, like, say 3 guys on the team, and you have your group of guys that you can always be that extra little bit of vulnerable with. I'm sure that happens inevitably within a team dynamic anyways, but just actually having it implemented into a team structure, it would be hard to do, and I think there would be some pushback, but that's definitely an idea at the very least. And yeah, Molly touched upon it. The accountability of it all would help a lot. And then I don't really have many new points. It's the ice surface. I don't even know if that would help completely. I don't really care as much about the business side of sport, even though I went through for sport management. But totally get what you're saying there, Molly. I do think it may make it safer, but what Tyler said earlier about the speed of the game and how that would also inevitably increase, and therefore the impacts of each hit could potentially increase. So I was thinking a lot about all of that, but this other idea that I kind of was thinking about is maybe, I don't know if it would be within the realm of the safety director per se, but having some sort of guideline for how broadcasters talk about concussions and head hits, and what they can't say, because that's where the culture is getting perpetuated at the grassroots level. So like maybe them not saying like, oh, he'll be out next shift, or oh, he really took that one on the chin. He looks like he's taking it pretty good, or I don't know, like those are bad examples, but like, you know what I mean? Just having some sort of guidelines so Brian Burke, like, he doesn't come off like Don Cherry when he's talking about a rock'em sock'em style of game. I know for me, that would help me actually digest some of the bigger hits that happen, because now I find that I'm kind of like really torn watching hockey at times when those hits happen, and then also listening to the announcers perpetuate that type of game. So that's where I stand.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess for me, I have a couple points. The main one I think is consistency. Seth talked about, never knowing what is suspension, what not is. And I know that specific hit that Tyler Myers hit, there was 2 nights before that in the Colorado game where the guy did the exact same hit and he did get suspended for 2 games. So I think from a perspective, if you're the person in charge of player safety, there shouldn't be judgment calls if it's a concussion or if a head is involved. So maybe not necessarily banning all headshots, but all shots that result in direct concussions or injuries like that should just be suspensions. The second part I look at it is I think that I would like to see the NHL do more on a mental health side, besides simply saying, hey, we're going to do 1 day at Bell, let's talk, and then forget about it for the rest of this 364 days. I think the NHL does a lot of PR work in terms of what's good on the surface and then stops when they need to do more. And a perfect example is their lack of continuation with the Hockey Diversity Alliance and all the stuff that happened over the playoffs. And that should be a simple, relationship that they should have going forward. So I really would like to see them do a little more without having to be bugged into doing it. And we'll open up to the group now.
I definitely think it's an interesting point that you said that even all hits that result in a concussion would be suspended. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that personally, because I think we all know, or most of us know, that you don't necessarily need to be hit in the head to get a concussion. And it's also subjective to the person itself who's receiving it. So say if I'm playing and I have had 7 concussions, I honestly, even from personal experience, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. So for somebody to come in and just hit me into the boards, I run a risk every time. But for somebody else, that wouldn't be a suspendable hit. So I think that you could get into a hairy situation there, where it would honestly probably blur the lines a little more. But yeah, I'm interested to hear if anybody else has any thoughts.
Well, the other thing too is you stepping up. Let's say I'm trying to pinch a guy coming out of F1s coming out of their D zone, and I'm stepping up on the blue line and my centerman's covering me, and I hit the guy and I get a concussion hitting him and I smoked him and he's fine. Then it's what would that, it's a really good point that you make. It's interesting. But yeah, I feel no one thinks about or even talks about that when you're the guy getting a concussion and you're making the hit. Last season, I hurt my shoulder a little bit. I stepped up just to hit a guy really clean, really hard on the wall. And it was a huge hit. And he fell, but it ended up hurting me physically a lot more than it hurt him. And I was just you always forget about that risk too of your actions. It's hockey always think about other people's actions to you, but yeah, that's an interesting thing. I just wanted to say that real quick because I just thought of that.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead, Seth.
Oh, no worries. I was just from hearing everyone and having talked first, I want to add a bit more to my answer, because the first thing that I'm thinking is I apologize in advance for my ignorance to what the actual role of the director of player safety is, but maybe making it a committee and not a one person, decision. Because as we've already heard, everyone's going to have a different perspective on what that hit should have been. And if you kind of only have the power of one person to determine it, that could raise some red flags and could have some biases and subjectivity that I don't think bodes well to the player safety. And the other part that I'm thinking of from something that you mentioned, Joel, is, there's a lot of lawyers in the NHL. So why not make it on a precedent base? If you gave one person a suspension for 2 games for this type of hit, then that's the precedent that you're setting. And that's not something that's been, consistent with the narrative of the league right now, because you're seeing some people get suspended 15 times because of a repeated offense, but the hit maybe wasn't as bad, to someone not getting suspended for a really bad hit, but because he's never done anything before. And it just seems like they don't have the best, I would say, ethical approach to it.
No, they don't. And the problem is different players get different reputations. A guy like Tom Wilson, I think, who is by all means mostly a clean hitter, but throws massive hits, and every time have people have the perception that he's a dirty hitter and he injures players. So I think it's absolutely tough because you don't know where to draw the line. I just think my thinking was it's tough from a fan perspective when I see 2 of the exact same hits two players that have the exact same injury and one is suspended and one guy gets nothing, it just looks bad on the league and there's no consistency. That's just why I was looking at it.
They go over all this stuff at rookie camp. If like you get to go to rookie camp or you go to training camp, there are days where you're not getting bagged and you're not in the gym. You go over all of this stuff. You'll watch clips with the team, and then they talk about, okay, like they go over this exactly. So it's really interesting to hear. But I wanted to mention that too. Like a lot of these guys, again, we don't fully know that full conversation because we're not in an NHL training room or locker room, but it's really gotten to be a lot better, I think, especially in the last decade with technology increasing and more tests coming out, because that impact baseline test, I don't know about you guys, but I could do that in another language.
I was going to say with my eyes closed. It's a joke.
I did it once, never again. So
yeah. After my second concussion, I actually went and I took the baseline again, and it was a trainer who I had never worked with before. And this trainer looked at me and was like, "You test off the charts. I don't understand." And I was like, "I got two-handed across the head with a hockey stick. I can't think something's wrong, but I could match the shapes." And so they didn't really get it.
I'm holding your intelligence against you.
Yeah, it's wild. That test is it's so brutal.
and the self-report measures as well, as like just in any research out there in any domain, self-report measures should never be solely relied on, because
you can't trust the data source. Or you can't.
I literally lied every single time I took one of those things.
But even
exactly,
you even think about something like, okay, yes, there is obviously that you want to say, you're farther along in your recovery, but would you, if you were a logical person, would you be asking a person who you knew had a brain injury to assess themselves and their fitness for any activity, let alone return to play? Like, I wouldn't have trusted myself in my concussion phase to walk the dog. Like, no, that's not the person you trust with a life or death decision.
Yeah, that's crazy to me. I think I don't know how many times I took it. The sad part was, like, I'm not trying to bash my university. It's going to go unnamed, but like we took it at that school too. And by the time I took it, I think I took it over 300 times at that point. I'm not even kidding, because, you have to take it the beginning of the season and then 2 weeks after that to make sure it pairs up with that first one. Then randomly, like after a hit, they'll like call you in for a meeting and they surprise you. Hey, we got this test, happen to be here. It's just
look,
funny.
The computer's here.
Yeah, right. Honestly though, the first time I took it, I was scared, because I knew that if this is the standard for testing for my return to play, I'm screwed. And I told my dad, I was like, 6th grade, I took it. Or maybe my first time I took it was 8th grade, actually. Pardon me. But I knew, I was like, this is a joke. Like, I can hardly remember where I am in my school right now, but I know how to pass this test. And my coach is saying, if I pass that, then I can go back on the ice and play the game that I like to play. Okay, I'll do that. Sure, no problem. Right. And then it led to, I wouldn't change it, but it's led to where I am now.
The thing with concussion recovery too is, like, you could be having an amazing day and the next day being really crappy, and you do the test on the day you're feeling well and suddenly the person thinks you're back to normal, but you're really not. So I think that's a really interesting point, and we'll kind of segue into our last topic here. So I'm just wondering if everyone can explain any resources that helped them during their concussion recovery or continue to help them today with any post-concussion stuff. We'll start with Ryan up top.
Yeah, well, considering I am going through a concussion right now, I have some new experiences with it. I would say, first off, that the ONF, the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation, their guidelines really helped me understand kind of the new processes involved with going through a concussion recovery. So like Seth mentioned, I think earlier, going through and actually taking your 36, 48 hours of rest, that's necessary right at the beginning, and then starting to slowly integrate into your daily activity and kind of monitoring it on a chart of like, if this is green, yellow, and red, you want to stay somewhere in between green and red, which is you feeling good. The yellow may have like slight symptoms coming on, but manageable at the very least. And then if you ever get to the red zone, you have to reset completely. So you really are trying to integrate back into your daily life. And that, honestly, I learned that in my last concussion, not this one specifically. And it helped me a lot. Like it really does help. And then for this one I'm actually meditating a lot more. And I find that it actually like relieves my symptoms almost immediately. And it definitely helps with my mental health. Going through it all and the concerns of like, am I going to get better? How fast can I get better? And the more regimented I've been with my meditation and the more I've meditated in each day, I've actually been significantly better that day and the next day afterwards. So it's going to be something moving forward that I'm going to be really keen on exploring further because it has truly helped me.
That's good to hear, and hopefully you are recovered soon from that. Pass it down to Molly.
I have never heard meditation working for concussions. That is fascinating.
I've been keeping a very detailed journal about my experience, so I'm
That's awesome.
excited to share it.
That I find it very difficult to meditate at the best of times, and I don't know that I would have been able to. I don't know that I would have had the mental capacity to try it. But in terms of resources, the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which I pledged my brain to science a couple. How many years ago now? 4 or 5 years ago. And they have a whole bunch of different resources, both in the US and in Canada. The thing that I found subsequently, not when I was recovering, they have a peer network and it's like a helpline. And I think that was really important for me when I was recovering. Not that I found it through CLF, but I had a best friend in high school who was a teammate of mine who had concussions. And when I was on that year off from school and I was suffering with headaches and sensitivity to noise and light, and I couldn't read and I couldn't look at my computer, my personality changed, obviously, and the depression started, the whole 9 yards. She was one of the few people who, because she had been there, could actually communicate with me in a way that didn't make me feel like I was not myself, because she understood that if I was a little bit, snappy, or if I couldn't talk for a long period of time, like, she got it. And so that, somebody had mentioned earlier, like the buddy system, that actually really did help me in my recovery. From a physical perspective, I worked with somebody to get my ocular tracking back and all those physical symptoms, but the only real physio that has ever worked for me is something called muscle activation therapy. And I am religious about it. It's the only thing that works for me. And I found with the concussion that was from the car accident that stabilizing my neck and my shoulders ended up reducing the severity of the headaches. And it actually made me feel a little bit more like myself, so that I could start doing some of that return to whatever normal looked like, walking around the block and feeling like I could read for a little bit. But the truly frustrating part about concussions is everybody's different. And there's no roadmap that I could print and, hand out on the street and everybody would feel the same way. So it's unfortunately just a trial and error thing.
For sure, that's a great point, that it's not a template for recovery, which is why I want to ask everyone this question. Tyler, pass to you.
Man, how much time left do we have? I was the guy that tried everything, literally everything. Electric stim on a machine called ARPWave, which I used for a lot of my other injuries. That has been really, really helpful, but not necessarily for my concussions. Although it's proved, I don't know, we'll see. I want to see the science behind it, but the guy Jay helped Crosby during the playoffs. I think it was in like 2011 or something. He got a concussion. Like, I don't remember the exact numbers, so don't quote me on this, but it was like a game 4 situation and he was back like game 6 and then they won the cup.
Yeah, it was against Washington. I remember that, when Niskanen hit him.
Yeah, so when Niski hit him, Jay Schroeder flew out to go treat Crosby with the ARPWave, and apparently that helped him. I don't know. I'd love to see the science behind that. And Jay is a very private, sensitive guy to that. But for me, I mean, I tried everything. I got certified in in yoga. So I have like 500 hours of yoga teacher training. I found that really helped, just stretching and not even like doing hard yoga, just laying in shavasana or like corpse pose and you're just laying on your back. Um, I got into a lot of things. So like mild stretching, just trying to be active, but then I was prescribed a lot of things too that are a little different. Like, like everyone's brain has a certain frequency, and like trying to find my brain's frequency and then doing other therapies with that. So like different wavelengths and frequencies to listen to it even. So like going to bed, listening to different like alpha, beta, gamma, theta waves, those will induce certain physiological reactions to your body and to your mind, as I'm sure Ali can talk about the details. I'm sure you know a lot, but doing that kind of thing. And then I got into like doing other things like pottery, literally sitting at the potter's wheel and just like trying to shape something. It was incredible. So like I did a lot of random things, like even just going out to the ocean every morning at sunrise for a year. Like I just sat on my surfboard and just like was a part of the ocean. I called it saltwater therapy, and just like breathe in the air and feel the water and be all salty and like see the sunrise. If I had really bad symptoms or something, I would just paddle in. I didn't even have to go surf. Like just being in the ocean was huge for me. So I did a lot of different things. We looked at my eating habits, my sleeping patterns, everything. It got really, really interesting, and I'm missing a lot I could share that's really interesting and fascinating, but I'd have to dig up journals. Hydration for me was really important, I realized, and now I carry a water bottle around everywhere. I drink like my body weight in ounces a day, which is crazy. I'm always peeing. But hydration I found has been huge. I don't know if you guys have found that too, but even like coconut water and then brain foods, like there you go, love it. But like a lot of salmon and kiwis. Yeah, so I just had like a holistic approach that really tried to target it organically, thinking if I was alive as like a Spartan in the movie 300, what would they prescribe me? Like maybe, well, maybe not that. They would probably be hard asses, but like back in the day with natural remedies, I'm sure there was a way to find remedies naturally with rest and other things too, just depending on what you need. But it was pretty cool. So I had a really good neurologist to help me with this. And then obviously the vestibular help as well to fix those corrections with that split was a big part of it too, just to relax my eyes. Even getting like a light prescription glass to relax my eyes during the day, and then wearing sunglasses everywhere. My wife will tell you like I'm moody if I don't wear my sunglasses because my eyes are so sensitive. But long story short, I mean, I have lists and lists of things, but it's just different. A lot of that worked for me, some stuff didn't, and some stuff worked for certain concussions which didn't for others, which I found really fascinating, especially because it was like me, thinking that my body would remember that. But our brain is flexible and it's changing. So
That's a great point. Yeah, even every concussion is different within the person. I'll pass that to Jake.
Yeah, I mean, now that you guys have all mentioned all these things, now I'm like, oh man, I got to do so much research after the conversation's done. Make sure I'm getting all I can out of therapies that are available to me. But for my own recoveries, I found that only really in the last year have I really been deep diving into brain health and recovery. I think mostly because I didn't really have a group of people to talk to about it, like Joel and me. We became friends about 5 years ago through two of my best friends who were on the same hockey team as him. And then we happened to live, down the street from each other and, share a lot of these mutual friends. And his dad was best friends with my dad's best friend. And we just became friends. And through that, I learned so much about what he was going through and all these different therapies that he was taking on, like osteopathy. Like he said that of all the things, going to his osteopath was the thing that changed his symptoms the most. And going to his osteopath was great. Like I got a lot of symptoms out of my neck, and I was saying earlier, I started going to craniosacral therapy about 4 months ago now, and it's just like a light stretch of the cranium, and a lot of my symptoms were kind of back of the neck, like left cranium side. And I feel like in terms of just clarity of thought, like getting rid of headaches, just general outlook on life, energy levels, it's pretty much night and day when I went to her originally in October and how I feel now. I think that has helped me the most from like an actual therapy perspective. But what I do on a daily basis in my own life outside of that is a lot to do with brain health and like supplements. So I take lion's mane, which is known to be one of the only mushrooms that actually helps with neurogenesis. And I've talked to Seth and Ryan and Joel about that before, and also starting to do a little bit of micro dosing with psilocybin, as it was proven to create more connections in the brain and kind of get things working again from that perspective if you're kind of lacking creativity. And then also to what Tyler said, doing things that get you in the flow state, doing creative like outlets, having things that you're able to create this energy within your brain that you don't get to do when you're kind of in your day-to-day life. So playing drums for me, I know is like a huge part of it in terms of my brain health, like actually getting into that flow where my body's just kind of doing its thing and I'm not overthinking anything. I'm kind of almost having an out-of-body experience. I know this guy, Stephen Kotler, who wrote the book, The Rise of Superman and Stealing Fire. He healed his own Lyme disease through the flow state, through getting into the flow state. And obviously, as we know, extreme sports people, are proving every day how far they can push the envelope in terms of tricks and dangerous kind of ways that they can do these different tricks. And it's flow or die for them, right? And they just show that the human brain has so much potential to kind of grow and push you beyond your means. And I think that the more we get into creative outlets and we get outside of our the beta part of our brain or the alpha part of our brain where we're overthinking things and we're kind of in our fight or flight modes and we're doing things that help our brains connect the dots and just produce good energy and good chemicals, that in of itself is really important. And I mean, I'm taking all kinds of like brain teas like ginkgo biloba and gotu kola. There's all these different things that this guy, Jim Quick, if you guys don't know who Jim Quick is, he's like my brain coach. He's a guy that's probably been the biggest mentor when it comes to having a good brain. He's like a brain coach for the biggest athletes, the biggest actors in the world. He just wrote a book called Limitless, which is basically how to have a better brain. So there's so much in that book. There's an index in that book. There's recipes. There's it's one of the most fundamentally life-changing books, probably the most life-changing book I've ever read. And there's so much good wealth of knowledge in that. And to what was previously stated, sleep. Getting into a good sleep routine, getting rid of your phone at night, like turning off your phone, getting your bedroom set up in a way where there's like really low lumens light and you're reading before bed and you're taking like an hour to get your REM cycle started properly and actually have a very restful sleep. I think when I started looking at a computer in high school and stopped reading and, creating these imbalances in my sleep schedules, it really messed things up and probably compounded all these symptoms I had from concussion. So there's so many little things you can do, and then there's the big picture stuff. But the little things I think compound together to be just as transformational and important as the big therapies you can get.
Sure, no, that's a really good point. Pass to Alley.
Yeah. For me, personally, I'm super stubborn. So it took me a really long time to even get any type of help. It didn't really help that I was at St. FX, which is kind of right in the middle of nowhere, not a ton of resources there. But as I was there, I found something that really did help me was just diving into the research and actually like educating myself on what was going on with me and, just not being in like a gray area, not knowing what's going on. It wasn't about until probably a year ago now, I started this program with a chiropractor here in Calgary, and he has a really great program called Regain Your Brain. And he does so many baseline tests and just basically measures he's a completely holistic guy, which is super important just with your overall health is your brain's not going to get better if you don't take care of every aspect of your health. So as soon as I started this program, I mean, we were looking at the pH levels in my body, the alkalinity, just like every stressor on my spine. You know, he told me I had like a unstacked lesion in my cerebellum in my right hemisphere, and it was just such a learning curve that I'm really happy I went through. And you know what, I just completed the program, and I can happily now say that I'm at the point in my life where I'm better than I've ever been. But it wasn't until I actually accepted what was going on with me and looked at it holistically. I know for me, sleep is a really hard thing for me. Something that's really helped is CBD and THC. I know it's legal in Canada, so you might as well take advantage of that. And then, I mean, unfortunately, at first I was just written a couple of prescriptions and sent on my way. And now I'm more holistic, and the supplements, not pushing the medication. There is a place for medications. I do take medication for my concentration, but I've kind of started getting away from that and looking more at the plant-based, more of the supplements, more of the natural stuff as well. And it has worked superbly for me.
That's great that you're doing really well. That's really good to hear.
Yeah, no, I'm pumped about it.
Now pass it off to Seth last.
Yeah, I think my fellow panelists have said a lot of really amazing resources, and to kind of echo the overall theme is the complexity of the brain. And something that I like to say to people is, you know, our brains have 100 billion neurons, and there are more connections in each of our brains than there are leaves in the Amazon forest. And when you put into that lay's term and you throw an injury on top of that, you know, as everyone's mentioned, there is no one cure. Like you have to take this holistic approach. You can't find one pill that's just going to alleviate everything. Unfortunately, that's not the nature of this injury. And, you know, and especially when we talk about neurodegenerative disease, then we really need to be talking about the role of inflammation. And you know, there's a lot of things right now like omega-3s, as Ali mentioned, CBD, that help with the inflammation aspect, but yet they're not, you know, deemed something that helps with concussions. And I think there needs to be a bit more of this holistic outlook in terms of, you know, as Tyler mentioned, the nutrition. You know, honestly, as everyone's mentioned, you know, it's sleep, nutrition, mindfulness, trying different modalities of therapy, hyperbolic chambers. Like, you can hear so many stories of concussions and hear so many different things. And when you go through it, you have to be open-minded to try a bunch of different things, because you don't know what that one thing, you know, like for Joel's osteopath, like you don't know what that's going to be for you. And unfortunately, as Tyler mentioned, even when you do, you know, have one concussion, you found something that helped, you could have another concussion and it won't do anything. And so really understanding that there are a lot of things out there that we can integrate into our recovery process. And we need to have these conversations to hear from different people's stories. And I think that's the best way that we can actually understand, you know, what different things works, what things you can be trying that have proven to succeed, and not waiting, you know, for all of the research to come out. Because for some people who are going through this, they're at, you know, a suicidal point. Like, it can get really tough. And, you know, we talked about mental health as the first topic. When it comes to the TBI community, suicide is the leading cause of death. And some people don't, when they're going through that, they don't realize all these other, you know, modalities because of the stigma surrounding them. So that's, you know, for me, I find it's really important to share all of these different things, because what works for me may not work for you, but it might work for someone else. And we need to all have, be able to express what did work for us without the judgment, or without, you know, there's not enough research to support that. Well, no, but this helped me, and it could help someone else, and it could save their life. And we don't know that until they try it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents. It's something I'm really passionate about, is the recovery process, because I think there's so many tools people don't fully understand. And, you know, unfortunately from this panel, like, we had to go through hell and back to find what worked for us, to try everything under the sun. So if at the very least someone can learn from, all of these different modalities that work for us and find something that works for them, and we're all doing our part.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I know, Seth, like what you just said reflects from what I dealt with. I had tried 4 or 5 different therapies before I had found my osteopath, and I didn't want to try the osteopath because I was so stubborn at that point, thinking that nothing was going to help me. And I really, when I found my osteopath, that was the first time where I felt that there was someone that was on my side and can, get through my issues, and more than just looking at me like, oh, there's this concussed person, go rest. She found out I had issues in my neck and my spine and my blood flow, and she asked me if am I sleeping right, am I hydrating, things that no one was asking me. And that's so for me now, it's an ongoing regimen. I'm dealing with this day to day. CBD is something that really does help me eliminate a lot of that brain fog, especially first thing in the morning. And like I think for me, one of the things, and we talked about identity. I lost so much when I stopped playing hockey, but the thing that I picked up in the last year or so is reading specifically hockey books, and I've gotten in a very good routine where I'm reading a new book now every 4 to 5 days, and reading more than I've read in my entire life. And I very much am looking at it like it's more than just simply reading. It's a hobby. It's something that I look at that I can do, and it doesn't stress my brain out. And so it's something that I found that I can enjoy and still kind of sink my teeth into. So yeah, definitely that's what's worked with me. And I really do appreciate everyone's perspectives and sharing their stories today. So thank you so much again